Hi, I'm Dave Gardy for Cybersecurity TV from our studios here near Washington, D.C. for the special presentation in the series Compliance Automation with SteelCloud. Joining us right now here in the studio is Mr. Brian Hajost, who's the COO of SteelCloud. Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Thank you.
And we also have Leslie Weinstein, who is the Specialist Leader for DeLoitte and also a Major in the U.S. Army Reserves.
Hi.
Thank you for your service. Brian, we've had a number of programs about CMMC. We've talked about it quite a bit. There have been a lot of changes in the last year. Can you summarize some of those?
Yeah, I mean, the one big, we went from CMMC version 1 to version 2. That version simplified the levels, so we went from 5 levels of compliance down to 3. It also more closely aligned the CMMC program to NIST 80171. So they're not two compliance regimens that you have to do. The two, there's no daylight between the two. So that, I think, simplified everything for contractors. And they continue to push the program forward. The assessment guide just came out today or yesterday. So now we have more documentation and we're moving forward. So excited about the changes, and I think everything they've done makes sense so far.
Leslie, can you summarize the outlook for the program?
Yeah, I think having the cap released earlier this week, I think it signifies that the DoD fully intends to move forward with this. I think we've been in a lull for a little bit, but seeing documents coming out, I think it's indicative that the DoD is serious, it is moving on, and moving in the right direction, and having more guidance where there was less. Now we have a little bit more. From what I understand, the DoD still hasn't sent the rule up to OMB for review, but I believe they're working on it.
So what CMMC level are you most concerned about? We'll start with Brian.
Well, we've always been in the original CMMC program, it was level 3 and above. In the new program, that's level 2 and above. At level 2 is where you're going to get your external auditing. You're going to have to implement security level controls like STIGs, and it is significantly higher level of auditing in level 2. So we really concentrate in the level 2, level 3.
Leslie?
Yeah, that's right. Level 2 is where you start handling CUI. So if your organization handles CUI or ITAR, anything like that, then you have to have a level 2. Level 1 is for FCI, federal contract information. But if you handle anything more than that, then it's you must be level 2 or higher.
Well, CUI seems really important, but most of the CMMC discussions have been about levels and controls. Can we take a step back and review CUI data? In fact, what is CUI data? Brian?
Well, I'll let Leslie go with this one. She wrote the book on CUI, but yes, it is a determining factor of what level that you're going to be in your CMMC program and how you're going to be audited.
Yeah, so CUI is information produced for or on behalf or by the government, and it has to be done under a contract if you're a contractor. Yes, the government can create it not under a contract, but if you are a contractor, the information, it has to meet those 2 criteria. It has to be produced for the government or on behalf of the government and under a contract. So if it's company proprietary information that the government is not asking for, or if it's like your HR records that you're producing for your own company, yes, you may have a contract, but the government's not asking for it, then it can't be CUI. But if the government wants this information from you and you're giving it to them under a contract, then it is CUI, if it also meets the other criteria for CUI in the CUI categories.
How do I know if I have CUI and who creates it? Leslie?
Oh, sure. So anybody, any authorized holder can create CUI. The government designated CUI categories back at the start of the CUI program. So the ISOO on the National Archives website has a list of CUI categories. Those categories are what the federal government has designated as CUI categories. But as an authorized holder, when I generate information, or if I'm putting together information, maybe old data that's maybe marked FOUO, and if I'm putting it all together and there's no markings on it, no CUI markings on it, if I look at that information and I determine that, my full faith and my good faith effort to understand this information, if I go and look at the registry and it falls into one of those categories, it's my responsibility to mark and label that information as CUI. Yes, it's a type of designating the information, but it's not that I'm inventing that category, it's I'm applying that category and those markings to the data that I have created for the government under a contract. So bottom line up front, any authorized holder has the ability to create CUI.
I thought, who's responsible for marking up CUI? I thought the government was the only people that could designate.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people believe that if they get information from the government, if it's not marked, therefore it's not CUI. And, why should I mark it if the government didn't? Well, the CUI program is new to the DoD. It's 10 years old, it's over 10 years old, but the DoD has only recently started implementing it. So they are new and learning just as much as we are. So even if they don't mark it, it doesn't mean that it's not necessarily CUI. So again, any authorized holder who handles it or creates it is responsible for marking and labeling it and then handling it appropriately.
Are there any special requirements for protecting the confidentiality of CUI, and such as an encryption standard?
Yeah, absolutely. Most people, when they think about cybersecurity, they talk about wanting to have a good cybersecurity posture and good hygiene, and that's great. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't. There are things outside of NIST 800-171 that companies should do. However, they should also be aware that CUI has some very specific requirements that may not be involved in a traditional cyber program. For example, FIPS encryption. CUI, if you're going to use encryption to protect the confidentiality of CUI, you must use FIPS encryption. So little things like that can really trip you up. If you are just thinking about good cyber hygiene, CUI has very specific things on top of that.
Brian, how should contractors view CUI data in light of their business?
Well, when you cut through the noise around CMMC, it really comes down to CUI. You either have contracts that have CUI data that you will house in your facility or networks, or you don't. Or you're going to be bidding on contracts where CUI data will be involved. So a contractor has to make the decision, what business are they in, what contracts are they going after, and what are the requirements of those contracts around CUI. Once they make that decision, they can determine whether they're going to be level 1, not handling CUI, or level 2 or level 3, if they're going to be handling CUI data. So it's probably the most important first step to determine what you have or what you will have in the contracts you're going after.
Leslie, what's your perspective?
That's right. Not only do you need to understand if you have the data, you need to understand where the data is. So wherever that data flows within your environment, that part of your environment comes in scope, and so could things that you may not necessarily realize become in scope when if your CUI is freely going throughout your environment and you're not keeping track of where it's going, you may not be applying the right controls where you should be. So knowing where your data is stored is the second most important thing, and then fixing it if it's not in the right place.
And Brian, how does SteelCloud help?
Well, for the contractors to determine that they're going to be CMMC Level 2 or above, meaning they're going to be handling CUI data, one of the requirements is to apply system level controls as specified by 171, 128, and 870. And we help in the automation of those system level controls throughout their infrastructure. Operating systems, workstations, applications. We help them get to the point where they can have a successful assessment.
And if people want to find out more about SteelCloud, where should they go on the web?
Yeah, www.steelcloud.com.
That's great. We've been talking with Brian Hajost, who is the COO of SteelCloud, and Leslie Weinstein, who is the Specialist Leader for Deloitte and a major in the U.S. Army Reserves.
Thank you.
I'm Dave Gardy for Cybersecurity TV and another in the series of compliance automation with SteelCloud. Thanks for watching on Cybersecurity TV.